The joke was easy. The kind you make without thinking. The kind that sits in the comfortable territory between two people who know each other well enough to say anything without it meaning too much. We were in the waiting room of a walk-in clinic, her with a wrist she'd come down on wrong at the weekend. Me there because she'd texted, and I had come, which is how it had always worked between us. While she was filling out the new patient form on a clipboard, I leaned over and said, "Put me down as your emergency contact. I want the title." She stopped writing. It was a small stop, a half second. The pen didn't move. Then she said, "You're already on it." I said, "What?" She said, "My emergency contact. You've been on my file for 2 years," and she went back to writing, with the particular focused attention of someone who has decided that the clipboard is the most important thing in the room. I sat with that sentence for a long time. "You've been on my file for 2 years." Said with no drama, no explanation. Said the way you say something that is simply true, that has always been true, and that you did not think required announcement. I looked at her profile, at the way she was filling in the form, at the careful, deliberate nothing of her expression. Outside, a child in the waiting room was explaining something important to a plastic dinosaur. I understood, sitting in that chair, that I had made a joke about something she had already decided 2 years ago, quietly, without telling me, as a fact of her life. That is a different thing from a joke. That is a different thing entirely. My name is Luke Calder. I'm 34. I build websites, not for corporations, mostly for small businesses and independent things, the kind of work that involves a lot of coffee calls with people who have a good idea and need someone to make it real and findable. I work from home, which means I have a home office that is actually the kitchen table, a good pair of headphones, and the kind of relationship with my own schedule that sounds more disciplined than it is. I live in a flat that my sister describes as functional, which is accurate and not entirely a compliment. Grace Holt had been my best friend for 6 years. We had met at a pub quiz. She had been on the opposing team. She had known the answer to a question about 19th century railway infrastructure that I had gotten wrong. And she had corrected me about it after the round in a way that was not unkind, but was very direct. And I had thought, I want to keep talking to this person. We had talked for 2 hours after the quiz. We had been talking, in one form or another, ever since. Grace was 32. She worked as a physiotherapist. She fixed people, in the practical, hands-on way of someone who believed in the body's capacity to repair itself, and had made a career out of helping it along. She was good at her job in the way the best practitioners are good, not just technically, but in the quality of attention she brought to each person. She had a specific patience with recovery, an understanding that it was not a straight line, and that the people who needed to take it sideways or backwards, or in a direction that didn't look like progress, were not failing. They were just working with what they had. I had watched her describe this once to a friend who was struggling with something, and I had thought, she applies this to everything, not just patients. And I had been right. She applied it to everyone she cared about, and she applied it to herself, with varying results on the second one. She had a small flat 2 streets from mine, which had been coincidence when I moved in and had quickly become infrastructure. She knew where my spare key was. I knew where hers was. We had each other's food preferences and each other's parents' names and each other's signal. The specific shorthand of 2 people who have spent enough time together that communication has become efficient in the way of a language only 2 people speak. She had a plant, a large-leafed thing in the corner of her living room she had named Harold, which she had been nursing through what she described as a difficult period for 3 years, and which remained, on balance, alive. She had a green jacket she wore to almost everything that was not a formal occasion. and which had a small repair on the left pocket that she had done herself, badly, and without apparent concern. She had a habit, when she was listening to something that interested her, of tilting her head just slightly and going very still. The specific stillness of a person giving something their complete attention, which is rarer than it should be, and which, I had realized over 6 years, I had come to associate with the feeling of being properly heard. I had noticed all of these things. I had cataloged them carefully and filed them under grace and not asked what that meant. I was asking now. Here is what the 6 years had actually contained when I looked at them clearly from a clinic waiting room chair. She had called me, not her sister, when she got the job. She had called me first, before anyone, at 9:30 on a Thursday morning, and I had been in the middle of something. I had immediately stopped. I had told her she was going to be brilliant. She had said she was terrified. I had said those were the same thing, in the right circumstances. She had been quiet for a moment, and then said okay in the voice of someone deciding to believe something, and I had understood that I had just been useful in a way that mattered. I had driven her to hospital when her father had his heart attack. Not the second person she called, not a backup. She had called me before she'd called her sister, before she had thought about what order made sense, because the order had been instinctive. I had sat with her in a waiting room not unlike this one for 4 hours, while the doctors said things that were reassuring, and then less reassuring, and then reassuring again. I had not known what to say for most of it. She had not needed me to say anything. She had needed me to be there, which I was, and which, I understood now, she had been noting. Filing. Building a picture of who I was in the crisis version of her life. I had been the person she texted when her lease renewal was a disaster. I had been the person who knew before anyone else that she and the man she'd been seeing for a year were not going to work, because I had watched her face carefully when she talked about him, and I had seen that the specific quality of light she had when she was genuinely happy was not present. I had not said this because it was not my place, but I had known. And when she told me it was over, I had not been surprised. And she had looked at me and said, "You knew. Didn't you?" And I had said a little, and she had said, "Why didn't you say something?" And I had said, "Would you have wanted me to?" And she had thought about it and said, "No. But I'd have wanted you to know. I'd want you to know." That sentence had stayed with me for weeks. I had not known at the time what to do with it. I filed it under grace, being grace, which was a category I had been using, I now understood, as a container for things I did not want to look at directly. The category had been doing a lot of work for 6 years. It was a large container. I had filled it carefully and closed the lid with equal care, and what I was feeling now, in this plastic chair with a dinosaur 2 rows away and a clipboard between us, was the particular sensation of the lid no longer fitting. There were smaller things too, and the smaller ones were sometimes worse, because they were the ones I'd had no excuse not to see. The way she always brought back a coffee for me when she went out, without asking, in the size and configuration I'd stopped having to specify by month 3. The way she had, during a difficult week I had not told her was difficult, texted to say, "You seem off. Are you off?" And she had been right, and I had told her. And she had come round and sat in my kitchen for 2 hours while I talked myself into a better place. The way she knew the right time to ask questions, and the right time to simply be present, which is harder than it sounds, and which almost nobody gets right. I had spent 6 years benefiting from this knowledge, and 6 years calling it friendship, and not asking why it felt like more than that. Why it felt, on the best evenings and the worst ones equally, like the specific thing I was most grateful for. I have poor instincts around the things that are most important to me. I tend to call them something else until something forces me to look at them properly. The form had forced me to look. Back in the waiting room. She was still filling in the form. or pretending to fill in the form, I had seen the pen stop moving, which meant she was doing what I was doing, which was sitting very still with the thing that had just been said and waiting to see what happened next. I was aware, with a clarity I had not had 2 minutes ago, that I was sitting in a plastic waiting room chair next to a person who had put my name on a form 2 years ago and had not told me, and that this fact was reshaping everything I thought I knew about the last 6 years. Not dramatically, just in the way that light changes a room when you open the right window. Everything is the same. Everything looks different. 2 years ago, I said. Yes, she said. That's when you moved to this clinic, I said. Yes, she said. You put me down without telling me. She looked at me sideways, just briefly. I didn't think you'd mind. I don't mind, I said. I mind not knowing. She was quiet. The pen was on the clipboard but not writing. Why me? I said. She turned the clipboard slightly in her hands. She did not look at me. Outside, a small boy had lost interest in the plastic dinosaur and was now investigating the water cooler with the methodical interest of a scientist. The nurse behind the reception desk was answering a phone with practiced composure. Because, she said, with the careful precision of someone choosing each word before they release it, if something happened. If something went wrong, you're the person I'd want. Not because you're the nearest, or the most practical, or the obvious choice. She paused. Just because you're the person I'd want. That sentence sat between us and changed the quality of the air. I thought about the job phone call, the hospital waiting room, the lease disaster, the relationship I had seen ending before she did, the text that said you seem off, are you off, the coffees always in the right size without being asked, all of it. 6 years of it, filed neatly under friendship in the container I had been closing carefully and whose lid no longer fit. I thought about what it means to be the person someone would want. Not need. Not require. Want. The specific word she had used twice, with the weight of someone who knew the difference. Grace, I said. Don't, she said. Her voice was level but held something underneath it. Don't what? Don't say something careful, she said. Or kind. Or the thing you say when you want to be good to someone without. She stopped. She set the pen down on the clipboard. She looked at the water cooler, at the boy who had now pressed his face against the plastic in a way that made the nurse look up. I've had 2 years to make this smaller than it is. I got very good at it. Don't help me make it smaller. I sat with that. I understood what she was asking. She was asking me not to offer her a graceful way back to normal, not to give her the kind response that would let both of us pretend the sentence had not been said, that we could fold the form back up and carry on. She had been folding it for 2 years. She was asking me not to hand her the crease. I'm not going to make it smaller, I said. She looked at me then, the particular still attention she had when something mattered. Her pen was still on the clipboard. The job, I said. You called me first. She did not move. The hospital, before your sister, before anyone. I know the right size of your coffee and the wrong one. I know what your face looks like when something is wrong that you haven't said is wrong. I know Harold's been through a difficult period. I know that the man before last was wrong for you months before you ended it. She was very still now. Completely. I have known all of this, I said, for 6 years, and I have been calling it friendship. And I think I stopped. I found the rest of it. It had been there the whole time, in the container, waiting. I think I have been using the wrong word. She did not say anything for a long moment. Long enough that the boy at the water cooler had resolved his investigation and returned to his parent. Long enough that the nurse answered another phone, and a new patient arrived at reception, and the ordinary machinery of the clinic continued entirely indifferent to the fact that the two of us had stopped. Her hand was on the clipboard. Her fingers tightened once around the edge of it, just once, and then released. "It took you a joke," she said. Low, careful, something underneath it that was not quite steady. "Yes," I said. "That's very you," she said. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry it took this long." "I listed you 2 years ago," she said quietly. "It took me that long, too. I'm not in a position to—" "Grace," I reached across. My hand rested near hers on the clipboard, not taking, not assuming, near. Close enough that the distance between us was now a choice, not a default. "You're the person I'd want too. If something happened. If something went wrong." I paused. "You've been the person I'd want for a long time. I just didn't have a form to fill in." She looked at my hand. She looked at me. She turned her hand over on the clipboard. Her fingers found mine. She exhaled. Quietly, slowly, the kind that means something held has finally been put down. From somewhere in the clinic, a nurse appeared in the doorway and called her name. She stood. She didn't let go of my hand immediately, held it one beat longer than she needed to, the deliberate kind. Then she picked up the clipboard and went, and I sat in the waiting room and looked at the plastic dinosaur still under the chair. And I thought about emergency contacts and the quiet ways people choose each other before either of them thinks to say so. Her wrist was a sprain, not a break. 6 weeks of being careful, which Grace managed with the imperfect patience of a physiotherapist who found it considerably easier to supervise recovery than to submit to it. She was not, she told me, a good patient. I told her I had suspected this for 6 years. She said that was not useful information. I agreed and brought her coffee in the right size, which she accepted without comment. The comment was in the not commenting. I had learned to read that particular frequency. I updated my own medical records 3 days later. I did it at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cup of tea, in the entirely undramatic way of someone filling out an online form. It took 4 minutes. The emergency contact field had been empty since I moved, an oversight I had been meaning to address for 2 years, and had not, for reasons I was only now understanding were not actually administrative. I did not tell her I had done it. She found out because her GP's office called to confirm the contact details for a routine form, and the contact listed was her. She texted me, "You put me down." I looked at my phone for a moment. I thought about honesty, about the difference between being clever and being true. I texted back, 2 years ago. This was not factually accurate, it had been 3 days. But she understood what I meant, which was, you were always going to be the one. I just took longer to make it official. She sent back nothing for approximately 90 seconds, which I counted, not obsessively, just with the attention of someone waiting for a specific thing. Then a single word. Good. I put my phone down on the kitchen table and went back to work and did not think about it, or thought about nothing else. I find it difficult to distinguish between those two states when something matters. A year later, at a dinner party hosted by a mutual friend, someone who had just met us asked how we had got together. Grace said a joke he made in a waiting room. I said a form she filled in 2 years before. The person looked between us and said, "Which is it?" And we both said both at the same time, and then looked at each other with the specific look of two people who have been speaking the same language for long enough that they occasionally say the same word at the same moment without meaning to, and find this more confirming than surprising. Harold made a full recovery. Grace takes the credit entirely. I note that I was the one who found the correct fertilizer after 3 weeks of research, but I am learning, to let her have certain things without requiring acknowledgement, which is both the adjustment every person makes when a friendship becomes something else, and also simply a good way to live. Some people choose each other loudly. They choose each other in declarations and gestures and the kind of moments that are easy to describe at dinner parties. We chose each other on forms, on paper, in the small administrative facts of our lives, 2 years apart and entirely in agreement, without either of us knowing that the other had already made the choice. Nothing had been declared. It had just been quietly, carefully, already true.